So let's run through the process of getting the DHCP server role installed on a Windows server using PowerShell. So the only prerequisite I want to mention, well, besides running PowerShell as administrator, is that you probably want to set your DHCP server with a static IP. And if you want to do that in PowerShell, because the theme of this snip is PowerShell, I've got the link for how to do that. We've got a great snip on it if you're not sure. So to install the DHCP role, we use the Server Manager module. And the first commandlet I've got here on line 18 is the Get-WindowsFeature, and then I'm using the WhereObject commandlet to filter for features that have a name with DHCP in them. And the reason I'm doing this is because the role names aren't always as simple as DHCP, like this one. And so I wanted to demonstrate how you would do that if you're trying to install another role as well. And then to install that role, we use the Install-WindowsFeature commandlet, give it the name of the role. And then in this case, I'm using the include management tools parameter. And I'm doing that because I don't want to type rsat-dhcp. Well, no, actually, include management tools is just easier to remember, because the names aren't always as simple as rsat-dhcp. So that's all. So anyway, so I'll go ahead and run this commandlet, and this is going to install DHCP. And I know that DHCP server doesn't need a restart, so I'm not using the restart flag, which would restart the server automatically, which is what you might want to do if you're doing an unattended installation. All right, so now that that installation is done, we can see from the results here that it was successful, no restart needed, and that the DHCP server and as well as the DHCP server tools were installed. So the next thing that we want to do is we need to create the security groups for that DHCP server. So typically when you have the GUI, it has an option for, you just click on the little link there for configure DHCP server. We've got to do that manually here. Well, manually. We write it once as a script and it does it over and over and over. So anyway, this line here on line 30, I'm not going to explain how this works, but what it does is it will list out all of the groups that are local to this server. And so we can see here that there is no DHCP server groups. And so to create those groups, we have to use the netsh command line tool and then use the DHCP add security groups parameter. And, you know, 99% of the time I would be shamed to have to use a command line tool. But in this case, there's no alternative. It's the official Microsoft documentation. If we run line 36 here to list out the local groups, we can now see that there's a DHCP administrators and a DHCP users group. So then to make that change official, we'll restart the DHCP server service. And the last thing you want to do is to authorize that server in Active Directory. And this is assuming that the DHCP server is a part of an Active Directory domain. If it isn't, pat yourself on the back, you are finished. And if not, let's check this out. So first thing here on line 46, this get DHCP server NDC commandlet. This returns all the currently authorized DHCP servers in your Active Directory domain. And you can see that I've got just one, DC01. So to add that in, we'll be using the add DHCP server NDC commandlet. And you can see here on line 57 how I've got that set up. But I don't like to hard code fully qualified names or IP addresses. So I'm running through some code on how to find that information through PowerShell. So for instance, here to get the current IP address of the server that I'm on, I use the get net IP address. And I do know that the interface alias is Ethernet and that I want the IPv4 address. So I'm using those parameters here to return that information. And you can see that it spits out a lot more than just the IP address. And so it's the IP address property I want. So here on line 50, I'm specifying that property and then setting the local IP variable with that value. And then to retrieve the fully qualified name, number of ways to do it. I found that the most effective when you have DNS in your domain is to use the resolved DNS name and then pass it the computer name using the environmental variable. And this returns a couple of different values. You can see I've got my IPv6 and my IPv4 values. And so I specifically want that A record. So I'm going to pipe that output to the where object command looking for the type of A. And then we'll use the name property. And then of course assign that to local FQDN. And so then we'll use the add DHCP server NDC commandlet with that local FQDN and that local IP to authorize that DHCP server. And of course we can verify that using the get DHCP server NDC commandlet like before, but this time we see that there is an additional DHCP server. So I've got DNS01, which is the server that I'm currently on, which I can demonstrate by looking at this variable here, the computer name environmental variable. So that is how you get the DHCP server role installed and run through the basic configuration steps using PowerShell.